Ethan Cole worked as a mechanic on a large space station. He was not rich, not powerful, and not famous. He fixed broken engines, patched fuel lines, and cleaned tools. His days were simple, filled with work and the quiet hum of machines. He liked it that way. Life in the galaxy was full of kings, queens, and powerful leaders, but that world was far away from him. He only cared about his job and earning enough to live. One evening, Ethan walked through the busy docks. Ships came and went, traders shouted, workers carried boxes, and the air was filled with noise. Among the crowd, he noticed a woman standing alone. She wore a plain cloak, and nothing about her showed wealth or power. But she had a presence that made Ethan stop and look again. Her posture was calm and strong, her eyes clear and bright. She seemed out of place, like someone who did not belong among the noise and rush. Their eyes met for a moment. Ethan gave her a small smile, the same kind of smile he would give anyone who looked lost. Then, without thinking too much, he raised his hand and offered a fist bump. A small, friendly gesture he used with workers and friends. To his surprise, the woman lifted her own hand and met his fist with hers. For a second, they both stood like that, hand to hand, sharing a quiet moment in the middle of the busy docks. Ethan thought nothing of it. To him, she was just a stranger who needed a little kindness. He moved on, carrying his toolbox back to his workshop, where more engines waited to be repaired. But in truth, the woman was not an ordinary stranger. She was Queen Eleanor, the newly crowned ruler of the Galactic Confederation. She had come to the station quietly, without ceremony, to see the lives of her people with her own eyes. The queen had been treated with bows and long speeches ever since her coronation. Everyone she met wanted something from her, or feared her, or tried to impress her. But this mechanic had greeted her like a normal person, with no fear and no flattery. That simple act, that small fist bump, stayed in her mind. Later that night, Ethan sat in his small room above the workshop. He ate a simple meal and thought of the day. He remembered the woman's eyes, sharp but kind, and the way she returned his fist bump. He wondered who she was, but soon let the thought pass. People came and went every day, and she was probably just another traveler passing through. Meanwhile, Queen Eleanor returned to her quarters, where guards and advisors waited. They spoke of politics, of trade routes, of treaties, and of war threats. She listened, but her thoughts drifted back to the docks, to the grease-stained mechanic, who had treated her as if she were just another face in the crowd. For the first time in days, she smiled to herself, remembering the moment. Ethan slept that night without knowing his life was already changing. The simple greeting he had offered without thought had touched the heart of the most powerful woman in the galaxy. Soon, his quiet world of engines and tools would be pulled into a much larger story, one that would shape not only his life, but the future of millions. The next morning, Ethan was back at work in the docks. He had a broken stabilizer to fix on an old cargo ship. His hands were black with grease, and his jumpsuit was worn from years of use. The work was hard but honest, and Ethan liked the sound of the tools more than the sound of people talking. While he worked, he overheard other workers whispering. They said the new queen had arrived on the station. They spoke of her beauty, her wisdom, and her new crown. Ethan listened, but paid little attention. The life of a queen had nothing to do with a man who fixed engines. When his job was finished, Ethan walked through the main hall to buy some food. The station was louder than usual. Soldiers in bright armor stood at every corner, and important-looking people rushed through the halls. Ethan shook his head. It was all too much. He liked quiet places, not crowded halls filled with guards and strangers. Then, as he turned a corner, he saw her again. The same woman from the night before. She no longer wore her simple cloak. Instead, she wore a long silver dress that shimmered under the lights. Around her were guards in shining armor. People moved aside as she walked past, bowing their heads in respect. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his heart beating fast. He realized the truth at once. The woman he had fist-bumped was the queen. For a moment he thought he should hide or turn away. He felt foolish. How could he have treated a queen like a common friend? But before he could move, her eyes found his. She slowed her steps, then stopped. The guards looked confused, but she raised her hand and told them to wait. She walked toward Ethan with calm steps, her silver dress flowing behind her. When she stood in front of him, she lowered her hood so he could see her face clearly. She smiled softly and said, "You are the man from the docks." Ethan nodded nervously. "I did not know. I thought you were just someone passing through." "You did not bow," she said with a small laugh. "You did not flatter me or ask me for anything. You only greeted me as if I was a normal person." "I'm sorry if I disrespected you," Ethan replied. "I did not mean to." But she shook her head. "No, it was the first time in many weeks that someone treated me like a human being, not a crown." The guards shifted uncomfortably, but the queen raised her hand and they stayed silent. She looked at Ethan for a long moment, then said, "Tell me your name." "Ethan Cole," he answered. "I'm just a mechanic." Her smile grew warmer. "Not just a mechanic, you are honest. That is worth more than gold." Ethan felt a strange mix of pride and unease. He wanted to return to his workshop, to his tools and engines, but something in the queen's voice held him still. For the first time, he saw that behind her title and dress, she was simply a woman who longed for real connection. That evening, Ethan could not stop thinking about the meeting. He sat in his small room above the workshop, staring at the stars through the tiny window. He wondered why the queen had spoken to him, why she had remembered him among thousands of faces. He told himself it was nothing, that she would forget him soon. But deep inside he felt something was changing. Meanwhile, Queen Eleanor returned to her chamber, where her advisors filled her ears with talk of politics, treaties, and power. She nodded, but her thoughts drifted back to the mechanic. She remembered his hands covered in grease, his plain clothes, and his honest eyes. He had treated her without fear, without agenda. And she realized how rare that was. In the quiet of her room, far from the noise of the council, she whispered his name to herself. Ethan Cole. A name that, against all reason, gave her comfort. She knew their paths would cross again, and when they did, the choice she made could change both their lives forever. Days passed on the station, and Ethan tried to return to his normal life. He worked on ships, fixed broken panels, and cleaned a small workshop, but his thoughts often wandered to the queen. He did not understand why she spoke to him, or why she remembered him at all. He was just a mechanic, and she was the ruler of many worlds, yet he could not shake the memory of her smile when she said his name. One evening, when the station grew quieter, and most workers had gone to rest, Ethan heard a soft knock on the workshop door. He wiped his hands and opened it.
Hey.
To his surprise, the queen stood there. She wore a simple cloak again, as if she wished to hide her true place. Two guards stayed outside, giving her distance, but she stepped inside alone. Ethan froze for a moment, unsure how to act. "Your Majesty," he said in a low voice, unsure if he should bow. She lifted her hand. "Do not bow. Tonight I only wish to be Eleanor." Ethan stepped aside and let her in. The workshop smelled of oil and metal, and half-repaired parts lay across the tables. It was nothing grand, but the queen looked around with interest, as if the room itself gave her peace. "Why are you here?" Ethan asked softly. She smiled faintly. "Because here, I am not a queen. Here, I am just a woman who can breathe without the weight of a crown." She walked to the workbench and touched a piece of engine metal with her hand. "You fix broken things," she said. "That must feel honest." Ethan shrugged. "Engines are simple. They break, I fix them, and they work again. People are harder." Eleanor looked at him carefully. "That is why I come here. With you, I do not have to be perfect. I can simply be myself." The words stayed with Ethan. He had never thought of a queen as lonely. But in that moment, he saw how heavy her life must be. Every day she carried the hopes of millions. Every word she spoke was judged. Every step watched. And yet here she stood searching for something real. In the weeks that followed, she returned often. Sometimes she came late at night, when the station halls were empty. Sometimes she brought food and they shared a simple meal on the workshop floor. She asked Ethan about his childhood, about his dreams, and about why he chose such a simple life. He told her stories of long nights repairing broken ships, of his father teaching him how to hold a wrench, and of his wish to travel the stars one day without duty pulling him down. She listened with quiet interest. "Do you not wish for power or wealth?" she asked once. Ethan shook his head. "Power brings chains. Wealth brings greed. I only want freedom to live in peace." Eleanor's eyes softened. "Then perhaps you are richer than most rulers." But whispers began to move through the station. Advisors noticed her absences. Soldiers wondered why she disappeared. Rumors spread like fire, and some people began to speak of betrayal. A queen spending time with a common mechanic was not something many would accept. Some saw it as weakness, others as danger. Ethan did not know this at first. To him, the workshop visits were private moments shared between two people who found comfort in each other's company. But Eleanor knew the truth. Each visit carried risk. Each word spoken could one day be used against her. One night, she arrived looking troubled. She sat down and placed her hands on the table. "There are people in the council who do not trust me," she admitted. "They say I am unfit because I spend too much time away from them. If they learn where I go, they will use it against me." Ethan frowned. "Then why come here? Why risk it?" She looked at him, her voice steady. "Because here I remember who I am. If I lose that, then I am no queen at all." Ethan said nothing, but in his heart he understood. She was not looking for another guard or another servant. She was looking for someone to remind her that she was human, not only a crown. And somehow, without meaning to, he had become that person. The calm days on the station did not last. Trouble was growing in the galaxy. Warlords in the outer systems gathered strength, and they saw Queen Eleanor as young and weak. Some of her own council whispered against her, hoping to gain power for themselves. On Celeris Station, the air grew tense. Soldiers arrived in greater numbers, and the people feared that war was near. Ethan kept working in his small workshop, trying to ignore the noise of politics, but he noticed the change. There were more guards in the halls, more meetings, and more ships arriving heavy with weapons. At night, when the queen visited, her face looked tired. She still smiled when she saw him, but her eyes carried the weight of worry. One evening, she told him the truth. "There are those who plan against me," she said quietly. "Some of my own council wish to see me fail. They say I am unfit to lead." Ethan set down his wrench and looked at her. "Then you must show them you are stronger than they think." Her voice was calm but firm. "Strength alone is not enough. I must show them I am not afraid, but I cannot do this if I forget who I am." Ethan listened and said, "You are not alone. Even queens need someone beside them." The words touched her heart, though she did not speak of it. She simply nodded and placed her hand on his arm before leaving that night. Soon after, the storm came. A faction of soldiers on the station turned against the queen. They had been paid by warlords and traitors to strike quickly before she could gather her strength. One night, explosions shook the docks. Fires spread, alarms rang, and people screamed as armed men stormed the halls. Ethan woke to the sound of blasters and ran outside. He saw guards fighting to protect the station, smoke rising from broken ships, and enemies rushing toward the throne hall. Without thinking, he grabbed a heavy wrench and ran into the chaos. In the main hall, Eleanor stood with her loyal guards, her silver dress torn by battle. She gave orders with a steady voice, guiding her people even in the face of danger. Ethan pushed his way through the smoke until he reached her side. She looked at him in shock. "You should not be here," she said. He lifted his wrench. "I'm not leaving you." Together they fought through the night. Ethan struck down attackers with the only weapon he knew, his wrench, while the queen's guards shielded her. The battle was fierce. Flames lit the halls, and the sound of steel and fire echoed through the station. At one moment, a soldier charged at Eleanor from behind. Ethan saw it and threw himself forward, pushing her out of the way. The soldier's blade cut across Ethan's arm, and pain burned through him. He gritted his teeth and swung his wrench, knocking the attacker down. Blood ran down his sleeve, but he stayed on his feet. Eleanor's eyes filled with fear. "You are hurt." "It's nothing," Ethan said, breathing hard. Mechanics fix more than engines. The queen's guards closed ranks, and together they pushed back the traitors. The station shook as ships fired outside, but slowly the tide turned. Loyal soldiers rallied around their queen, and the attackers were driven back. When dawn came, the fires still smoked, but the queen still stood. Her people gathered around her, tired and wounded but alive. At her side stood Ethan, his arm bound with cloth, his jumpsuit torn but his spirit strong. The people who saw them together whispered in awe, Queen who fought among them, and a simple mechanic who stood by her side. In that moment, Eleanor knew her life had changed. She was no longer only a ruler in name. She had faced betrayal and fire, and she had stood her ground. And the man who once greeted her with a fist bump was now part of the legend that was beginning to form. People moved slowly through the ruins, cleaning, repairing, and mourning those who had been lost. Yet through the sadness, there was also pride. The queen had stood with her people, and she had not fallen. Ethan walked through the halls with his arms still bandaged. The cut he had taken in the fight hurt, but he did not complain. He felt different now. He had gone from fixing engines to standing beside the queen in battle. He still thought of himself as a simple mechanic, but others looked at him with respect. Workers nodded when they saw him. Soldiers gave him small salutes. To them, he was no longer just another man in grease-stained clothes. He'd become part of the story. Queen Eleanor stood before the people the next day. She did not wear a crown of jewels, but a plain robe, showing she was one of them. Her voice carried across the damaged hall as she spoke. "We faced betrayal," she said, "but we stood together. We fought side by side, not as rulers and workers, but as humans. This is the strength that will keep us alive." People cheered, their voices filling the broken hall with hope. Ethan stood in the crowd, quiet, but his heart lifted at her words. He saw in her not only a queen, but a woman who cared for her people and fought with them when they needed her most. Later, when the crowd had gone, Eleanor found Ethan near the docks. She walked slowly, her steps careful, after the long days of battle. He was repairing a damaged shuttle, his hands black with oil as always. When he saw her, he wiped his hands and stood. "Your Majesty," he said, unsure how to greet her now in the open. She smiled and shook her head. "Do not call me that when it is only us. Call me Eleanor." Ethan nodded. "Eleanor, then." For a moment they stood in silence, the sound of engines and distant voices filling the space. Then she lifted her hand, slowly, with the same simple gesture from their first meeting. Ethan blinked, surprised, but then smiled. He raised his own hand, and their fists touched once more. The same fist bump, but now it carried the weight of all they had been through. "You have changed me," Eleanor said softly. "When the world saw me only as a crown, you saw me as a person. When others wanted power, you gave me honesty. Because of that, I found the strength to stand." Ethan looked at her and said, "I only did what anyone should do. I treated you like a person, that's all." "It was more than enough," she replied. Her eyes shone as she spoke. "I want you to stay by my side, not as a guard, not as a servant, but as a friend I can trust." Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest. He'd never asked for glory, never asked for power. He only wanted a simple life. But now he understood that his place was here, beside her, helping her remember the human heart behind the crown. In the months that followed, the galaxy spoke of the queen who had fought for her people, and the mechanic who stood beside her. Songs were written, stories were told, and hope spread through the systems. Some called Ethan a hero, but he never saw himself that way. He was still the same man who loved the hum of engines and the smell of oil. In a galaxy filled with war and ambition, their story was a reminder that sometimes the smallest gesture is a smile. A word, a fist bump could shape the future of worlds.